Well, the congressional baseball game is on just a day after that unbelievable shooting that injured 5 people, including a congressman. During practice, we're going to take a look here at whether this will finally spur a little bit of unity in the country, and particularly Washington. Then the special counsel reportedly looking into whether President Trump obstructed justice. Who he wants to talk to is very telling about whether he may have a case. Now, remember when President Trump did a victory lap after the House passed Obamacare repeal? Well, now he's criticizing that exact same plan, calling it mean. Will Republicans who went out on a limb for him do the same time next time? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you for joining us this Thursday evening. Now, about an hour from now, the congressional baseball game will start at Nationals Field. In fact, you're looking at a live picture there in D.C. Now, the charity game has been a Washington tradition going back to 1909. But this year's game, obviously, very different. In fact, it was in jeopardy after yesterday's shooting at a practice field in Alexandria, Virginia. 5 people were injured. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise in critical condition, that after getting shot in the hip. Congressman Scalise underwent a second surgery this morning. President Trump and the First Lady, they visited Scalise in the hospital yesterday, but the president will not be attending tonight's game due to security issues. It is too big a challenge to try and provide protection at very short notice, as originally the president had not planned to be in attendance. Now, back on Capitol Hill, the vast majority of lawmakers, they are taking this opportunity to call for unity. They have said the right thing. They've done the right thing. It has been a marked change in tone. But of course, as is, I guess, life, but particularly Washington, those sentiments do not apply to everyone. Republican Congressman Steve King of Iowa, who you can always rely on for these kind of things, said America is divided and the violence on the streets is coming from the left. That's just for starters. He also blamed Barack Obama. Here's his direct quote. Quote, I do want to put some of this at the feet of Barack Obama. He contributed mightily to dividing us. He focused on our differences rather than our things that unify us, and this is some of the fruits of that labor, end quote. He was not alone in these sentiments. Listen to what Republican Michigan Congressman Jack Bergman had to say and who he's blaming.
Unfortunately, and I'm looking all of the media in the eye when I say this, friendships and cordial relationships don't make good news. I think the media is complicit if they keep inciting as opposed to informing.
But South Carolina Congressman Mark Sanford, who also, by the way, is a Republican, he had a different take. Listen to what he said.
I would argue that the president has unleashed is partially, again, not in any way totally, but partially to blame for demons that have been unleashed.
Pointing the finger there at Trump. Let's bring in our panel right now. Richard Brodsky is a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Bill O'Reilly, former Republican strategist, now a member of the Conservative Party, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. Listen, I believe there was genuine attempts at comedy on the Hill. There's always a few outliers. We talked about a few of them there. But I even found myself tonight, when I read what Steve King had to say, and to me, at least, the outrageous hypocrisy, if you look at what this man has said and some of the things he's trafficked. And I was getting ready tonight to just rail and bring up all the quotes of, and I'm like, what am I doing? It's this perpetual loop that we all feed into. And I don't think it's irresponsible, by the way, to point out when somebody's full of it and use their own words to mark it against them. But then I caught myself saying, to what end? And listen, I want this to hold. I don't know and don't believe it will, but I certainly think the attempts are honorable. But we've seen a congresswoman almost die, and her staffers and other people in attendance do die in Arizona not long ago. We heard the words, and then we saw the return back to where we are. We'll get into a minute Andrew's point that we were making this morning. We're talking about this isn't just a Washington, D.C. issue. This goes far beyond the Beltway. This is a national issue. And, of course, the media certainly is a portion of that. But, Richard, part of the job of people, and you are one of the elected people, is to passionately fight for what you believe is right. And there will be disagreement. Our founding fathers basically created a government that we would have that, and with checks and balances, and the idea where healthy debate is part of what makes us, I believe, the best democracy on the planet. However, the question I have is, can you really have that passionate debate with the reality of 24-hour news and the fight for a soundbite?
Of course you can.
Without the ugliness that comes along with it?
Of course you can. The civility, which is sort of being good manners, is not what this is about. This is about a political culture which has decided that the way to win is to attack not the ideas but the legitimacy of the opposition. And I believe they started it, but Democrats and the left have engaged in it more recently to almost the same extent. If the people of the United States do not respond to that kind of behavior, it will stop. If the people of the United States continue to respond to that behavior, it will continue. So in the end, I've seen the enemy and they is us, as Pogo, the old comic strip, used to say.
Is a little bit of this, Bill, that we're looking at this with rose-colored glasses? You look through history. I'm not talking about even the general population, Andrew, which we'll get into in a second. I'm talking about just politics. Things were ugly. I mean, yellow journalism and all the rest where you got into it. Some of the things that were said from the beginnings of this country on. Yes, we didn't have 24-hour news where you saw the soundbite every which way but Sunday and talking heads at every opportunity instead of, let's say, the Cronkites of the world. But my point is, this isn't new. We're just hearing it more.
It's not new. You maybe think of the Marie Antoinette, cards. They passed them out in the street. The pictures that I won't go into detail on. It's been out there a long time. I love this topic because I've been watching this. We've all been watching this unfold for a long time. I think Richard's absolutely right. I talked to a Republican consultant at a wake of all things about 3 or 4 months ago, and I was kind of talking about this issue, how we're just getting out of control and it's getting so nasty, and the rest of it on both sides. And he said something very simple, and I think he's right. At some point, it'll stop working. And we do what works in politics. And at some point, the American public needs to, and will naturally get to a point where it doesn't work anymore for a while. It'll come back.
We've talked a lot about Watergate in context of the Russia probe and where there's similarities or not. And I don't want to go down that road this second, but my point was, the one thing in reading up on then and now, and I don't believe this is Pollyannish, you saw more people, maybe because it wasn't as gerrymandered and all the rest, or for whatever reason, maybe more people served in the military in this country as part of their biographies because everybody did. But they put country before party sometimes.
That's right.
And people would call BS if it was wrong. Again, it wasn't perfect. I'm not pretending it was. But I did see a lot more people willing to cross lines, and R's or D's didn't necessarily. I think at a different time, more people would have said, let's say about the president, you've gone too far, stop.
You call each other out, right.
Right.
Look, there was a time in the post-World War II era where politics got gussied up and prettified. But if you go back to what they said about FDR, if you went back to what they said about Teddy Roosevelt, if you went back to what they said about Jefferson, John Adams, there's a history of this stuff. The problem here, if what makes it different is the intensity of the news coverage and the availability through electronic media of an immediate reaction, and having there's a premium on being the loudest and the most aggressive.
Plus, and I think the digital world, I'm sorry to interrupt you, you're going to go, digital world has a lot to do with it. The internet has driven a lot of this. The other thing is a sluggish economy. And I wonder how much, these things tend to work when people are hurting.
And I also think where before you would get maybe 10 people who would do the talking for each party, now everybody knows they have an outlet. If they're a freshman backbencher, and the more extreme they say it, they'll get there. But Andrew, you made the point today that it's not in a vacuum, it's everywhere. And we were debating, because I said, you look at the numbers, in the 70s, things were a hell of a lot more violent in this country, more unrest, worried about where we would go. I mean, we use simple and more complex analogies from murder rates to just go to a ball game and how many fights you'd see versus now. But you still think it's coarser now?
I do, and I think part of that's a point that Bill made before. I don't see a lot of brave politicians. Politicians don't try to start a completely new trend. They pick up on what they think will connect with people and what works with people.
No,
and most politicians do, Richard.
It was always that way.
And right,
Andrew.
but that, to me, that indicates that something in our society has changed, and that there's a greater acceptance for coarseness and people holding tight
sound
to
like
their
my
political
grandfather.
and people holding tight to their well, maybe your grandfather didn't interrupt people when they were wrong.
Well, that wasn't true, as a matter of fact.
So, but it's like now you question somebody's political belief, and it's almost like you're questioning their religious belief. And part of that may also, on the more political macro sense, there was less ideological purity back in the 70s and the 60s. You had conservative Democrats, you had liberal Republicans. So the parties had their own spectrums within it too. So now you have the ideological purity that has conservatives in one party, liberals in the other. And so that also, I think, prevents people from being more cooperative in the political realm. But I think Bill's right. Politicians talk like this and do things like this because it's accepted. It gets through to people.
And from the personal aspect, I remember a story Charlie Rangel told me. He said, Rich, this is going back, I guess, in the beginning of the freshman class of the Tea Party when they first came in. He said, I went over to talk to a buddy of mine, a Republican that I'd known for 20 years. And when I walked over there, he said, another one of the guys says, why are you talking to him? He's with them.
Right.
And he said, first of all, I wanted to wrap the twerp. He goes, but a lot of my best friends were Republicans. Guys I used to have cocktails with and whatever else. We don't do that at all anymore. Is that overstated, or is it really? You must have seen it in Albany also.
Where the Tea Party came in, it is not overstated. And that happened to an extent, I think, much more clearly in Washington than it did, for instance, in the state capitals, and where a certain degree of informal respect and mutual communication already exists. Look, you can describe this in the way you have done, but ask the question again and again, why? Why is this now an acceptable behavior? And the answer it is because it moves voters.
Exactly.
And why does it move voters? Because there's been a level of social dislocation and anger that we haven't seen since the Depression.
I know we're tight on time, but Sunday night I was watching the U.S. play Mexico in soccer and qualifying for the World Cup, and it dawned on me that everybody who was in Mexico rooting for the U.S. probably weren't all liberals, probably weren't all conservatives, weren't all Democrats. We can come together in national unity to root on our sports teams, to root on our World Cup team, to root on the Olympics.
Or in the aftermath of a tragedy
but we
like 9/11.
can't seem to do it any other time. And I don't know if there's a lot of interest or desire to do that, but I'd like to see us try.
Well, we're going to see what comes out of today, because I genuinely believe, not all, but I think some of them look at this as an opportunity that it has gotten too far. But I have said that before. Hopefully this time will be different. All right, coming up next, Special Counsel Robert Mueller. He's staffing up, and he's also ratcheting up his probe into the Trump administration and Russia. Now, he's got his eyes right on Trump and his intelligence team. We'll tell you why this could be very significant.